I'm Bob Bowman, Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Brain, and I want to welcome you to this special presentation, a webinar on digital planning transformation. Accelerate or hesitate? Real-world data on post-COVID supply chain planning, presented by ToolsGroup. First, a little housekeeping note before we get started. We are going to be having a question and answer session at the end of this presentation. Audience members are encouraged to submit their questions at any time during the presentation simply by clicking on that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. And we will take as many audience questions at the end as we possibly can, time permitting. At this point, I'd like to introduce the two speakers you'll be hearing from today. We're going to be hearing from Caroline Proctor. She is Chief Marketing Officer of ToolsGroup and leads global marketing and communications. She has over 2 decades of experience as a marketing strategist and team leader for supply chain and enterprise software companies, including Manugistics, JDA, Just Enough Software, Relex Solutions, and Deltek. We'll also be hearing from Mark Baxa. He is President and CEO of the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals, or CSCMP. His experience in supply chain leadership spans 40 years, including 20 years with CSCMP. He also serves as Vice Chairman of the St. Louis University Center of Supply Chain Excellence, has facilitated supply chain policy development at the EU and US federal levels, and teaches executive courses at the university level. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Mark Baxa. Mark, take it away.
Well, thank you, Bob. With an introduction like that, I can hardly wait to hear myself speak. The reality is that today, on behalf of CSCMP and our partnership here with ToolsGroup is something that we're really excited to share the results of this actual study, and I think you'll find it most informative. So let's carry on with our introductory slide, and we'll talk about the contents of what we'll talk about. So digital planning, transformation, accelerate or hesitate? Well, here's a preview of what we're going to be talking about today. We'll learn a little bit more about how our responders talked about COVID influencing supply chain digitization plans. And you'll be able to compare how your digital roadmap compares to others. And what are some of the biggest roadblocks to digitization today? Where are companies performing well and where are we falling short? And what are other companies doing to improve preparedness and resiliency? I'd like to introduce my partner and collaborator in today's conversation, Caroline Proctor. Caroline, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for being such a great partner in the development of this really interesting research project. I think a great place to start is to focus on a handful of the highlights from this year's study. We did a similar study in 2019, and I'm also going to take just a minute or two and highlight some of the differences between 2019 and 2021. A lot's changed in the world, so obviously there have been changes between the studies, so we'll look at some of those highlights. The first highlight I'd like to call out from the 2021 study is that only 3% of companies experienced no COVID-related impact. 97% of the companies that participated either experienced increased demand, significantly decreased demand, supplier disruptions, supplier shutdowns, et cetera. So most businesses have been impacted in some way. The second highlight is that 42% say the pandemic has accelerated their digitization plans. I don't think that's too unexpected either. After how supply chains have been disrupted over the last year, lots of supply chain organizations are saying, how can we be better prepared to quickly respond the next time? The next highlight is that 90% of respondents are somewhere along the digital transformation journey. So that means only 10% of the companies that participated are saying that they're not undertaking any digital transformation at all. So for that remaining 10%, I'm not sure what it's going to take to get them moving, but a global pandemic didn't do it. And the last highlight is that 41% say that staff and skills deficits are threatening to slow their progress. So that's a major obstacle for them. That was only 23% in the 2019 study. So that's a pretty big change over 2 years on where the obstacles are. And I think that could be a result of so many companies now undertaking digital transformation projects. They quickly realize that they don't have the staffing and the skills needed to undertake that type of project. So if we take a quick look on the next slide on what's changed since 2019, not surprisingly, the pace of transformation has greatly accelerated. Next is where automation came in. So we didn't have automation included in the 2019 study, but since then, automation, autonomous supply chain, et cetera, have become really hot topics. So in this year's study, automation debuted as the number two driver of transformation and the number 2 application of machine learning. And automation may be a way some companies are hoping to address some of their staffing and skills deficits, do more with people that they have, focus the people they have on higher level, more impactful tasks. The next one I found really interesting is that fear and risk, which were separate responses in 2019, fear and risk of transforming have been overtaken by the fear and risk of not taking action. So companies were not beginning to transform before because they were afraid to do it. Now most are afraid not to take action. In the last difference I'd like to mention is that investments in core supply chain functionality maybe slowing down investments in machine learning, AI, digital twins, some of those newer technologies. We'll take a look at this in a little bit more detail later, but investment in those areas seems to be at about just the same level in 2021 as it was in 2019, but investments in some of the more traditional supply chain capabilities is accelerating. So Mark, I think this is a great place just to start jumping into the detail of the 2021 results. And I was wondering if you could start by talking about how COVID has impacted businesses and how it's really impacted their digital transformation efforts.
Absolutely. So responders in our study talked about that clearly a number one, almost 1/2, revealed that there were process vulnerabilities. And these process vulnerabilities were raised across the entire supply chain, where the business had misalignment and or inability to function to its full expected level of performance. Supplier instability also were key shifts in supplier platform or supplier access was also a very top leading indicator of negative or downward effects or impacts on the supply chain. Understanding the supplier base's capability and core competencies, but also transparency and perhaps their extended supply chain and their very means of financial wherewithal were also scoped as problems. So if we take also a look at demand and demand variability, many companies saw increased in demand. Perhaps these were surges that were unexpected, but as a result of shifting consumer preferences, as a result of the dynamics of what happened actually culturally in terms of where people were at, staying at home, for example, for sure had an impact and to some degree protecting their lifestyle. Demand decreased for also a number of companies, and this was indicative of the shift in consumer buying patterns, but also manufacturing demand to support those consumer practices. Significant staffing changes and shortages. It's very key here. And often you see surveys that really have a great Pareto, but not quite here. There's a lot of top indicators that are fairly close percentage-wise that everyone selected as having an impact on their business. So when we think about staffing, it's the talent mix, but also just dynamics in the marketplace that were caused by the incident of human health and impacts on people's ability to work. 3% said that there was no impact. So that's almost insignificant in the case of this study. Let's move to the next slide for more information on this very topic of digitization. So let's think about strategy here. So 42% of the companies said that the impact of COVID actually accelerated supply chain digital transformation, and that would be holistically. 26% said it had no impact on their digital transformation. And that could be a number of reasons. It could be that there was already an accelerated pace, nothing changed, or whatever pace they were on, or didn't inspire new changes in digital transformation. 17% indicated that there was a need to shift their priorities within their digital transformation journey. 8% said it significantly delayed their transformation, and that could be impacted by human health and other factors, or financial wherewithal. And then finally, 7% said it put their plans on hold temporarily. Let's look at some more information on the next slide. But before we go there, well, let's go back just one real quickly to emphasize the fact that we had a clear position here identified by our responders that said it really accelerated transformation, better visibility, predictability, and stronger analytics to identify where the risks were and the opportunities in satisfying the consumer demand as well as sustaining a competitive position. Okay, we'll move on. So a great quote appeared recently in Forbes by Blake Morgan, and he said that companies start a digital transformation, but it's never truly over. So once you're in, you're truly in. A true transformation is a state of mind for a company to continually evolve and adopt new digital solutions. And I think many on this conference call today and this webinar would also understand and probably recognize that it's truly an ongoing journey that simply never ends. Okay, so let's talk about where companies are in their digital journey. Our responders identified it this way, that 10% said they weren't pursuing a digital journey. 22% said that they were exploring at this point. And when it comes to actually evaluating and moving on beyond that, 17% said that they were in a good position to evaluate. Gaining broad organizational support was 11%, but 28% said they were actually executing, while 12% said that they were reaping the benefits. Very interesting dichotomy and spread among our responders, but you could see that there is a fair amount that are actually gaining broad organizational support, executing, and reaping the benefits. Okay, let's move on.
Thanks, Mark. Let me take it from here. So we wanted to find out how well supply chain organizations are handling some challenges. And we know that those organizations face a myriad of challenges all the time, and the pandemic has only intensified them. When asked how well their organizations are handling things like supplier uncertainty, SKU and product proliferation, escalating fulfillment costs, they gave themselves pretty good grades of very well and moderately well. So it's good to see them handling those challenges so well. However, they fared far worse in some other areas, such as staffing and skills, which we keep talking about, but it's such a major challenge, and also rationalizing multiple ERP systems. If we move forward, what I'd like to move on to now is what are really the key drivers of digital transformation. So the top 3 reasons that the companies participating in the study called out were keeping up with evolving customer behaviors and expectations. That's been a problem. I think the pandemic has only worsened it and made consumers more unpredictable. Increasing automation to focus staff on higher level activities. Touched on that before, that may be a reason companies are pursuing automation. Driving business performance, increasing revenues, profits, cash flows. That was also a very significant driver when we surveyed in 2019. Other top factors included improving customer service levels and order fill rates, faster, better reaction to unplanned disruptions, and building resilience into the supply chain. And it's not surprising to see needing to be better able to respond to unplanned disruptions and being more resilient, being significant drivers given where we've been for the last year. And now that we know what's driving them and they're driving, what's standing in the way? What are the roadblocks? So the most significant roadblocks are the people skills deficit, quality, data quality. We've got the COVID related uncertainty that's going to hang around for a little bit, and then rigid technology infrastructure. As I've mentioned earlier, this is a significant shift from 2019 when fear and risk were number 1 and number 3 out of the top 3 obstacles. So I really believe that as companies have started to really move forward in their transformation journeys, that they're hitting those obstacles related to really getting serious about it and digging into it, right? They're evaluating and they're trying to gain broad support. So they're finding out they don't have the skills. They're finding out they don't have the data they need for what they want to do. And rigid technology, they don't currently have the technology they need to build responsive, resilient supply chains. In 2020, Boston Consulting Group did a similar study around transformation. And they found that digital transformation requires people to acquire new capabilities. And getting people to acquire those new capabilities is one of the most difficult aspects of the journey. And both managers and employees feel that hiring, training, and upskilling are the least successful elements of their company's transformation. So I find it concerning to see that the most significant roadblock in the way of transformation is the thing they are feeling they're doing the worst at. They're giving themselves poor grades, and they're saying it's the most difficult thing to do. So a little bit concerning in an area that companies really need to focus on. We also took a look at the study in terms of where the companies are in terms of their transformation journey and the roadblocks that they're hitting. And it's really varying by where they are in their journey. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly because I want to give Mark a good amount of time to comment on these. We found that companies not pursuing a transformation strategy are really held back by fear of change and really lack of investment, right? They don't have the investment dollars to put into the transformation. Companies in the exploring phase are most likely to cite skills deficit. And that's not unexpected. They start into the journey and they immediately figure out, we don't have the staff and skills to maybe even do this. When they move into the exploring phase, they have some risk aversion, but then they start not only having the skills deficit, they start realizing they don't have the data. So they've started to dig further into what's going to be required to make this transformation. And now it's like, we don't have the skills, we don't have the data, we have to really work on this. In the next phase, they're trying to gain broad organizational support. Not surprising that this is when they start to have to prove the business case for the investment in the transformation, and they fear that they're not going to be able to build out that business case to gain support. In the next phase, when they actually start executing, lack of data, major obstacle, right? They're really into the executing, they're really digging into the project, and they're finding lack of data is a really big issue for them. So Mark, I'd love to have you comment on this.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. And this is really from a practical experience perspective that many, certainly of our listeners are perhaps experiencing or have experienced, or maybe about to experience. But let me share some things that I think are very, very critical out of all of this. One of the most impactful pieces, and let's go back to the previous slide. One of the most impactful pieces of this is really the execution phase and master data. You've heard the term that quality of data in often will determine the quality of data out. And that's very true. It's in fact hard-coded data that impacts the effectiveness and usefulness of output or connectivity in any digitization process. So understand full well that as you gain support for a digitization effort, whatever it might be, whether it be planning or logistics execution, event management, AI, different forms of advanced machine learning, that the data components can often cause a very hard stop in what is otherwise an approved and invested project where you have received not only permission to proceed, but an investment has been made and that capital and expense has been set aside to drive whatever digitization effort you have decided to embark upon. So understand before you execute that you really know the quality of your master data, where it's coming from, where it sits for sure, and how it will be utilized, and in fact, the quality of that information that you will be entering into your system to rely on higher quality and more visible output that helps you make decisions. You don't want to be in a bad place. So from a practical experience and perhaps a little bit of pain along the way, take it from someone that's done several major implementations that it's very important to understand the quality of master data. And that's not all in or holistic in terms of everything else, because the talent that's involved, their capability and competency of knowledge, not only in the IT structures, but also the business portion of what you're trying to digitize are very paramount as well. So just some additional thoughts for those who are with us today to consider as you embark on your digitization journey. So we'll carry on now to the next slide, and we'll talk about some top line comments here. So the study pointed to the fact that larger companies have made the most progress, and that's probably no surprise to anyone here today on the webinar. If you're greater than $5 billion, you're furthest along in the digital journey, and most of those in the repair and benefit, most of those are in the kind of the repair and benefits phase. Or, what I would say is that key today is that not only company size, or reaping the benefits, I should say, company size really doesn't indicate that that's where you're going to get the largest benefit. It just merely says those are the ones that are making the most progress. So let's talk now on the next slide about small and medium enterprises. So digitization can really help. And I'd like to present it in a way that says, creating competitive advantage is yours to be had. You don't have to be a major multi-billion-dollar enterprise to think that you can't enter the digitization efforts without that, unless you've got that kind of financial wherewithal. There are ways to get a level up, not only in your business, but on your competition. So it's a big part now of advancing for even small and medium businesses in a post-COVID era. Let's look at this as part of your business enterprise, and let's think about this as part of helping you create competitive advantage as you move forward. You might be surprised what you can actually afford to invest in. So carrying on now to our next topic here, let's think about this. So for those that are actually advancing, half of those firms are reaping the benefits, say that their transformation is being led by the CEO. And does that measure up with where you are today in your company if you're actually reaping the benefits? Leadership from the top. There's something to be said for this endorsement, but there's more to be said for the leader of the company recognizing that to create a sustainable business and a competitive advantage with digitization is being driven by the CEO, the leader of the company. Let's look at the next slide. So it's binary, and we'll roll through these topics really quick. It's binary in terms of the actual choice is what the data tells us in this survey. Let's carry on with the next couple of bullets real quick. So you need to be the architect of change in your business, or in the second bullet point here, you might be a victim of change. It's really black or white here. So choose to be the architect of change. Caroline, we'll turn it back to you.
Sorry, I'm not sure if I was on mute. So I really hope more supply chains organizations decide to be architects of their own change versus victims, because when supply chains fall victims to disruptions, we all, the consumers, right, all of us become victims. So I really hope they do that. Everyone knows that part of digitization and transformation is an investment in technology. So we wanted to gauge where companies are, where are they investing, in what timeframes are they investing. And as I mentioned earlier, we see the investments being made in what I would call core supply chain planning capabilities, your traditional supply chain forecasting and planning, inventory optimization, sales and operations planning. Gosh, in the face of COVID, everyone needs to be running all these what if scenarios and simulations, right? How are we going to react? We don't know what's coming. Transportation planning, order planning, replenishment. So a lot of projects underway, a lot of them under consideration. And as I mentioned earlier, we're seeing about the same investment percentages in machine learning, digital twins, advanced simulation as we were seeing in 2019. I would have thought that those would have advanced, but with the impact of COVID and a lot of companies revisiting some of their core capabilities, it might have slowed those down a little bit, but it's great to see so many projects underway and under consideration. And then the final question we asked them was about, on the next slide, where are they considering applying artificial intelligence and machine learning in their journeys. This is quite consistent with what we saw in 2019. A lot of companies thinking about applying it or applying it around forecasting to get better accuracy or to sense demand. Automation was a new addition to the survey, as I mentioned, and a lot of companies looking at automation as a place to apply AI and machine learning. Not surprising, because to do automation, you really need artificial intelligence and machine learning. So it was just interesting to see where they're going to be applying it or are trying to apply it today. And as we do this survey every year, it'll be interesting to see how this changes, because I expect this to be accelerating. I thought it might be interesting now just to talk about a couple of ToolsGroup customers and how they were impacted by COVID and how having some advanced technologies installed really helped them. The first was a beverage manufacturer. So when there was the first COVID spike, early last year, they really expected their business, their demand to really decline significantly. Restaurants and bars were closed, people were at home. So again, they really expected their demand to drop off. Using demand sensing, they quickly, their systems were able to recognize that that wasn't going to be the case. What was happening is their demand was shifting. So rather than people consuming beverages outside of the home, they were consuming them inside the home. So they quickly sensed this demand that consumers wanted to go to their local markets, their corner stores. They wanted cans, they wanted bottles, they were going to consume beverages at home. And I think all the studies are showing that COVID has increased the consumption of these types of beverages. So they went from kegs to cans and bottles. And now as we come out of the pandemic, their systems will be sensing a shift in the other direction. So again, having that technology allowed them to sense these changes very quickly and rapidly change their supply plans. The second customer was an automotive spare parts company. Again, they expected the same thing. COVID spikes, people are locked in their houses. They really expected demand to drop for spare parts, tires, etc. And just the opposite happened. Their system sensed that demand was actually increasing. And now that we think about it, it's, people were locked at home, just as we did home improvements. Some people took that as a chance to make some changes to their cars, right? Do some things they've been delaying. In certain areas, people that didn't want to use public transportation bought used cars. Used cars need spare parts. They need new tires. Now we're faced with the chip shortage. So even more increased demand for used cars, spare parts, tires, etc. So again, having that visibility and that sensing technology allowed them to sense these changes so that they could quickly react and be ready. So just really interesting stories on how we really thought one thing was going to happen, but something drastically different is what really occurred. Let's see, I think, Mark, I'm going to turn it back to you for some points that we would like people to take away from today.
Very good. So as a result of today's conversation, we've got a couple of things we'd like to share to kind of put things together and kind of bucket up what we've learned. So for many, COVID created a mandate to digitize planning. There's no question to enforce the reality that visibility into what's coming in and going out was critical. 90% of companies are somewhere along the digital journey. Skill deficits threaten to delay those efforts. Larger companies are further along in digital, but digital can help small and medium businesses grasp opportunities. Strong executive leadership is crucial to digital outcomes. And then finally, our digital investments are helping companies better serve customers, increase business performance, and automation. Caroline, those are our key points and things I think we've discovered in this collaborative study. And I hope this has been a real benefit to those that have been a part of today's webinar.
Thanks, Mark.
And thank you, Mark, and thank you, Carolyn, as well. We now move into the question and answer portion of our presentation. We do have some audience questions, and while we are in the process of answering them, audiences continue to be encouraged to submit as many questions as we can get in before the end of the session. I'm going to start with this one, just kind of a general definitional kind of question from an audience member. Can we get a sense of the size of the survey? Number of companies, US versus international, et cetera. Any info would be helpful to put this all into perspective.
Well, I'm just looking to see if I have those. They are included in the research study. If you want to download it, you could visit the ToolsGroup website. I do know we had more than 200 companies participate. I would say we were about 80% US, about 20% in international, but the exact numbers are included in the actual research report.
Thanks, Caroline. What type of businesses belong to the 3% that did not feel the impact of the COVID pandemic? I'd like to know this myself.
I do not know that off the top of my head, unfortunately.
Okay, well, it's hard to believe that anybody was unaffected, but somewhere deep in there are these people who are sheltered against the world. I don't know who they are, but
Yeah, exactly.
okay. Why are larger companies more advanced in digital transformation?
Oh,
Also,
Mark, you want to speak to
Caroline,
that?
sure I can. I would say that, and again, it's Bob, it's without a clear, clearly defined response here that's 100%, right? So this is purely from a knowledge of, learning along the way, that, we won't say the bigger they are, the harder they fall unless they prevent the fall. The reality is that size and scale often provides the resources of which technology like this, as well as the skill sets within larger companies, to actually avail themselves to implement such technologies and structures, as well as the if you will, the advancement in supply chain processes and ongoing business process improvement, whether that be Lean or Six Sigma or other means to do that, often lead to a higher level of understanding of what standardization and optimization of those standardized practices can bring in terms of value, competitive advantage, total cost of ownership. So they're more likely to invest in the automation aspect of that to enhance that even further, to create competitive advantage and a sustainable business.
Thank you very much for that. What are the biggest challenges you're hearing from companies post-COVID?
I would say among the top is a challenge to one particular, but again, all functions are affected here because all make the sum of the whole. But perhaps the one you find most frequently tapped are in fact those that had the most hidden, if you will, risk, but perhaps unknown risk to many supply chain leaders and CEOs of companies, and that is their sourcing strategy. What is the extended tail of that sourcing of raw materials needed to manufacture and deliver the goods that consumers demand became an awakening for so many companies. And let's look at one example. Let's look at Wuhan, China itself. And not from a standpoint of the debate or the known facts around where COVID came from. Let's set that aside. What I'm really talking about is the manufacturing center of Wuhan. So if you look at the Fortune 100 companies that were invested in an extended international supply chain that began or had a beginning somewhere in Wuhan, there was a high degree of dependency on that manufacturing center. And when you look at the tier 2, tier 3 suppliers of your primary suppliers, now you're into so many more that actually had tails into that particular center. So breaking away from that geography and just speaking holistically, we're now in a period of reinventing what collaboration and strategic partnerships mean. And we're going to have to learn to understand giving more means getting more and figuring out how to get there. So often when you're negotiating for supply, you give only what you need to so that you can defend ultimately the end game, price and quality, right? So now we have to be a bit more open in our negotiations and willing to be transparent so that we understand the risk, because we have to decide what kind of resiliency and redundancies are necessary to assure we don't fall into a trap where something can't be delivered that affects our ability to deliver our customer. So I would say the sourcing and procurement function has got a heat lamp above its head at the moment and will for a while. Now, they're not the only function because all functions in the supply chain are connected. That's why we call it a chain. The other part I think is perhaps really apparent is the investment that people leaders are making in their people. And this is going to sound a little self-serving because I'm representing an organization that's in that business of helping others develop in role and for their future roles. This is what we're about and creating those networks. But people leaders need to realize that the investment in today's people in their role and future roles matter. So why are we caught short? Why do we not have the knowledge and the capacity to do the things we want? Well, let's start looking inward just a bit and how we're developing our people and ensuring they have the maximum opportunity to learn and create a stronger, if you will, core set of competencies so that they can deliver the kinds of things the business asks. So I would say the whole people piece is a real challenge coming out of COVID. Not to mention the health impacts. The health impacts are what they are. And that's very, very severe in many, many cases and has affected so many around the world, and particularly those that are in functions within the supply chain. So I would consider those kind of the bleeding edge, but like I say, Bob, others follow pretty closely in the function of supply chain.
Mhm.
Seems like it always comes down to people. Those pesky humans always get in the way of the perfect supply chain, right? And speaking of non-humans, have you seen adoption of artificial intelligence in supply chain actually increase over the past few years? I'm interested in the answer to this because I've heard varying results depending on who's saying it. But what have you guys seen?
So,
Yeah.
Caroline, you want to jump on that, and I'll pipe in as well.
Sure. Well, as I covered when we were looking at the technology investment, it looks like it's been fairly consistent between 2019 and 2021, so not significant increases, though we see customers quite interested in prospects in AI and machine learning as it has to do with promotions. Promotions are a hot topic, so how do you forecast promotions? How do you do new product introductions? Things like that. So we do see a lot of interest in machine learning, and ToolsGroup had, where we were early pioneers into machine learning. We've been into it for 10 years, applying it across our product suite. So we do see a lot of interest in it, and I expect to see an increased uptick of actually adopting it.
And I would
say,
yeah, I would concur with that, Bob. To say that everybody needs to be a part of it, jump in as fast as you can is probably a really incorrect statement to make. Artificial intelligence and machine learning is something that I think will continue to evolve in the supply chain. And that's a rather benign statement to make, but it's true. People who really understand the opportunity to create advantage for supply chain speed and accuracy, but also predictability and best defending the delivery model, right? Will invest in technologies that help create more of a predictive front. And adapting that information and knowing how to respond to it will also require some learning. We all know that, if you will, let's look at weather, right? Weather prediction models have gotten so much better. Well, if you understand the decision science behind that and the technology, you'd be absolutely blown away. There's tremendous opportunities in the supply chain, and probably some people on this call right now know from a competitive positioning standpoint, you're adopting it and you're using it wisely to outflank your competition and create a better business model. So when I say it depends on the company's wherewithal to invest, its ability to make mistakes, its permission to make mistakes, and frankly, the capability financial wherewithal to invest and if you will, pilot it first.
Yeah. This next question is interesting because in our privileged position as supply chain professionals, we hear about digital all the time. So we just assume that it's being embraced everywhere. But this audience question asks, how can practitioners get the conversation started about digital with leadership, with corporate leadership?
Well, a compelling business case and a vision of what the end goal looks like or should look like is something that has to be well thought out, carefully crafted. and shared based on the environment within the company you work. And every company has its own culture, has its own mission and own objectives. And you want to make sure you're aligned with that. If you're not, you're a one-off, right? Or you will be looked at perhaps in a way that doesn't get a lot of attention or perhaps not credible. So you want to be very careful about that. But based on the need and demonstrating the gaps in the business and how you plan to solve with a combination of, if you will, a standardization of your business process, steps to optimize it, and then add digitization to enhance that optimization in a well thought out proposed plan, garnering support and syndicating your ideas among the right leaders for that kind of support is what matters. It takes time, but don't underestimate the fact that the person that's conveying the message needs the backing, and they themselves must be credible within the organization.
Yeah. So this sounds like it might be another one for Mark. What advice would you have for people just entering the supply chain planning industry right now, other than run?
No, I'd say run in.
Run in. There we
You need
go.
lots of help.
Mhm.
And I'd say partner up with CSCMP, join the organization and take access and get access to the stuff that we can provide you to help your continuous learning so you can continue to enhance your own brand and your own development. But, aside of that, I would say that you would be entering a field that is very critical, both on the manufacturing planning, demand planning side, that really makes things happen. And the matter of influence you can have on an S&OP process or business planning process is very vital to the long-term survivability of the company. It's a great role and a great part to be in, or a great function to be in supply chain, as many others are as well. But I'd say that right now, people want to know what people are going to buy. And that's a great function to be in many companies, whether it's formally designed or it's merely a role you have in maybe a small or medium enterprise. Planning is very critical in terms of inventory balances, shortages, right? And you could just imagine tying that back to working capital. It's a very, very important role and a very pivotal role in terms of and delivery of the business results.
Well, I have certainly learned a lot about digital planning transformation myself today, and I'm assuming that our audience has as well. I want to thank our two excellent speakers, Caroline Proctor of ToolsGroup, Mark Baxa of CSCMP. Thanks for that great presentation. Really appreciate it. The next step for audience members, check this out. Check out the full survey report that we've been talking about for the last hour. And you can subscribe to the supply chain planning blog. That's www.toolsgroup.com/blog. And finally, you can connect on LinkedIn with both Caroline and Mark. There's their names right there in their LinkedIn identities. So thanks again, Caroline and Mark. Thank you, audience, for listening in. It's been a great experience. And everybody, have a great day.